I never thought I'd say this, but being alone in my own house terrifies me now. I used to find solace in the quiet, an escape from the chaos of the outside world. But that was before it started happening. It began on an unremarkable Tuesday evening. The kind of night where you order takeout and binge watch a series you've already seen. My roommate, Clara, had gone to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving me with the place to myself. I relished the silence, or at least I thought I did. The first oddity was subtle. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone while waiting for my food delivery, when I heard a faint creak upstairs. Our house is old, wooden floors, groaning pipes, so I dismissed it as the natural sounds of an aging building. But then it happened again. A deliberate, rhythmic creak, like footsteps pacing back and forth. "Clara," I called, even though I knew she wasn't home. My voice echoed faintly, unanswered. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe I left a window open, and the wind was pushing something around. Still, a gnawing unease settled in my chest. I grabbed my phone and turned on every light on the first floor, as if brightness alone could chase away the discomfort. The delivery guy showed up minutes later, and I remember lingering at the door after grabbing my food. His presence, though fleeting, was comforting in a strange way. He was real, solid, a connection to the normal world. But as soon as I closed the door, I was alone again. As I ate, the pacing upstairs continued. I ignored it at first, focusing on the warm food in front of me, but the sound grew louder, more deliberate. My appetite faded as the uneasy rhythm of those steps consumed my thoughts. It wasn't until I heard the muffled sound of something falling, like a thud, directly above me, that I froze. I stared at the ceiling, the fork still in my hand. Someone was up there. My first thought was to call the police, but then doubt crept in. What if it really was just the wind? Or a raccoon that had somehow found its way into the attic? I decided to check it out myself, armed with the nearest weapon I could find, a broomstick. The stairs creaked as I ascended, each step slower than the last. My heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out nearly every other sound. I stopped at the landing, gripping the broomstick tightly, and listened. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the doors to the bedrooms and bathroom all ajar, just as I'd left them. Feeling foolish, I checked each room, my fear subsiding slightly as I found no signs of an intruder. The attic door, however, caught my attention. It was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness peeking through. I don't know what compelled me to climb up there. Some stupid, primal need to prove to myself that I was imagining things. With shaky hands, I tugged on the attic's pull-down ladder and climbed up. The air was thick and musty, the faint scent of mildew invading my senses. My flashlight illuminated piles of forgotten boxes and old furniture, casting long, menacing shadows. But there was no sign of anyone, or anything, up there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and turned to leave. That's when I saw it. A single footprint, imprinted in the thin layer of dust covering the floor. It was fresh, clear, and definitely not mine. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, and bolted down the ladder, slamming the attic door shut behind me. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I tried to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I knew I'd seen. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. I locked myself in my room, clutching my phone and searching for distractions, but nothing could erase the image of that footprint. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it was restless and filled with vague, unnerving dreams of someone standing over me in the dark. The next morning, the house felt normal again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dispelling the suffocating sense of dread that had enveloped me the night before. I almost laughed at myself for being so paranoid, but when I went to make coffee, I found something that froze me in place. On the kitchen counter, written in the condensation of a water glass, was a single word. Leave. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the faint letters. My rational mind tried to come up with an explanation. Clara could have written it before she left, but why would she? And why hadn't I noticed it yesterday? I wiped the counter clean and tried to shake off the unease. Maybe someone had broken in and left without stealing anything. It made no sense, but it was better than the alternative. I decided to work from a cafe that day, avoiding the house altogether. By the time I returned that evening, I was exhausted but no longer scared. The sun had set, and the house was quiet again. Too quiet. As I stepped through the door, I noticed an odd smell, faint like burnt hair. I wrinkled my nose and searched for the source, but found nothing. It was only when I passed by the mirror in the hallway that I noticed something was wrong. My reflection seemed off. It mimicked my movements, but there was a delay. A slight lag, as though it wasn't entirely in sync with me. I froze, staring at it. Slowly, I raised my hand. My reflection did the same, but the movement was jerky, unnatural. My breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought I saw its lips twitch into a faint, sinister smile. I stumbled backward, knocking over a vase on the table behind me. The crash broke the spell, and when I looked again, the reflection was normal. Perfectly normal. But I wasn't. I spent the next hour pacing the living room, every creak of the house sending shivers down my spine. I wanted to leave, but where would I go? Hotels were expensive, and my friends all lived too far away. Besides, part of me felt that leaving wouldn't solve anything. Whatever was happening wasn't confined to the house. It was tied to me. That night, I dreamed again. This time, I was standing in my bedroom, staring at the corner where the shadows seemed unnaturally thick. Something moved within them, a faint silhouette of a figure watching me. Its presence was suffocating, and though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was smiling. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. My room was dark, but something felt wrong. I reached for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, barely visible in the faint glow of my phone screen. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by shadow. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then it spoke, a raspy whisper, like dry leaves scraping together. "You shouldn't have stayed." I don't remember what happened next. I must have blacked out because when I woke, it was morning, and the figure was gone. But the words it spoke stayed with me, etched into my mind. I left the house that day, taking only what I could carry. Clara didn't believe me when I told her what happened, and I didn't blame her. But I knew I could never go back. Even now, months later, I feel it, watching me, waiting. And when I'm alone, I hear it, those faint, rhythmic footsteps, pacing just above me. The static in the walls. I moved into the house a month ago, desperate for a fresh start. It wasn't much, a one-story fixer-upper at the edge of town, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. After years of sharing apartments with noisy roommates, the thought of having my own space was intoxicating. But now, as I sit in the dark corner of my bedroom, clutching my phone with trembling hands, I wonder if being alone in this house was the biggest mistake of my life. It started small, as these things often do. A faint hum, like the buzz of old electronics, would creep into the silence whenever I turned off the TV or closed my laptop. It wasn't loud, just barely audible but persistent. At first, I thought it was some sort of electrical interference. The wiring in the house was ancient, after all. But it wasn't the wiring. It wasn't anything normal. The first time I truly noticed something was wrong was late one evening. I was curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, scrolling through my phone. The room was quiet except for the soft hum, which had become so constant that I hardly noticed it anymore. Then, without warning, the hum shifted. It wasn't just noise anymore, it was a voice. A faint, static-laced whisper crackled through the air. My body tensed, and I looked around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there. But I was alone. The whispering continued, low and unintelligible, like a radio station just out of range. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling. It was a stupid thing to do, but I couldn't stop myself. The whispering stopped immediately, leaving a suffocating silence in its place. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear faint murmurs coming from the walls, like someone was standing just out of sight, speaking softly into my ear. Over the next few days, things escalated. Objects began to move on their own, not dramatically like in a horror movie, but subtly. I'd leave a book on the coffee table and find it on the floor. My keys would vanish from the hook by the door, only to reappear hours later in the kitchen. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful, but it became harder to dismiss as the days went on. Then there were the lights. They would flicker at odd times, plunging me into darkness for a few seconds before sputtering back to life. Once, as I stood in the kitchen making dinner, the overhead light blinked out, and in the brief moment of darkness, I felt it, something brushing against my arm. I dropped the knife I was holding and scrambled for the light switch. When the light returned, the kitchen was empty, but the sensation lingered, cold and wrong. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Stress, maybe, or an overactive imagination. But deep down I knew better. Something was in this house with me, and it was growing bolder. One night, I decided to record the hum. I don't know why, maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I set my phone on the coffee table, hit record, and left the room. When I returned an hour later, the hum was still there, faint and steady. I played back the recording, expecting to hear the same sound I'd grown used to. Instead, I heard whispers. Clearer this time, though still distorted. My heart pounded as I listened, straining to make out the words. "You shouldn't be here." I dropped the phone, the recording still playing as the whispers grew louder and angrier. I fumbled to turn it off, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it again. When the recording finally stopped, the house fell silent. But the air felt charged, electric, as if the walls themselves were watching me. The final straw came a week later. I was in bed, trying to fall asleep despite the constant hum. I'd started wearing earplugs, hoping to block it out, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just in my ears, it was in my head, vibrating through my skull. That night, the whispers returned. Louder this time, and unmistakable. They spoke in unison, a chorus of voices overlapping and echoing through the room. I couldn't make out most of what they said, but one phrase repeated over and over. "Get out!" I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. The figure. It stood in the corner of my bedroom, a dark silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. I couldn't see its face, if it even had one, but I felt its gaze, heavy and oppressive. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was paralyzed. Then it moved, not quickly but deliberately, stepping closer to the bed. The hum in the room grew louder, a deafening roar that made my ears ring. The whispers became screams, distorted and angry, as the figure reached out toward me with an impossibly long arm. I don't remember how I got out of the house. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the front yard, barefoot and shaking, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent, but I could still hear the hum faintly, as if it was following me. I never went back. I sold the house as quickly as I could, not caring about the financial loss. I didn't tell the new owners what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud, as if acknowledging it would make it real again. But even now, in my new apartment, far away from that cursed house, I can still hear it sometimes. The hum, faint and distant, like it's waiting for me to be alone again.